I was a simple woman who was humiliated in a watch store until my billionaire husband walked in. I never thought a simple shopping trip would turn into the most humiliating and later, the most satisfying experience of my life. But I guess that's how karma works sometimes. It was a crisp autumn day in Boston. The leaves were turning golden, and a cool breeze swept through the streets of Newbury, the city's upscale shopping district. I'd spent the morning at the hospital where I work as a nurse, and I was still wearing my plain clothes, faded jeans, a simple gray sweater with a few lint balls clinging to it, and comfortable flats that had seen better days. My hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and I hadn't bothered with makeup. I probably looked exactly like what I was, a tired healthcare worker who'd just finished a 12-hour night shift. But I had an important mission. My dad's 65th birthday was coming up next week, and I wanted to get him something special. Something that would show him how much I appreciated everything he'd done for me. You see, my dad isn't my biological father. He's actually my uncle who took me in when I was 8 after my parents died in a car accident. He was a high school history teacher who barely made ends meet, but he never once made me feel like I was a burden. He gave up dating, worked summer jobs, and stretched every dollar to make sure I had everything I needed. When I got accepted to nursing school, he sold his vintage car collection, the only luxury he ever allowed himself, to help pay for my tuition. Education is the one thing nobody can take from you, kiddo, he'd told me. Material things come and go, but what's in here, he'd tap his temple, and in here, he'd point to his heart. That's what really matters. Those words had guided me through life. I lived modestly, saved what I could, and tried to focus on what truly mattered, helping others as a nurse and being there for the people I loved. So when I spotted an ad for Chrono Heritage, one of the most exclusive watch boutiques in Boston, advertising a collection of vintage timepieces, I immediately thought of Dad. He'd always admired fine watches, even though he'd never owned one. He used to browse through watch magazines, pointing out designs he found elegant. It was the one indulgence he'd allowed himself to dream about but never pursue. For years, I'd been saving up for something special for him. Between my nursing salary and extremely frugal living, I'd managed to put aside $8,000. It was a lot of money for me, almost a quarter of my annual take-home pay, but Dad deserved something extraordinary after all he'd done. As I pushed open the heavy glass door of Chrono Heritage, I was immediately enveloped in the rich scent of leather and polished wood. The boutique was immaculate, gleaming display cases, soft ambient lighting, and plush carpeting that muffled my footsteps. Classical music played softly in the background. I felt out of place immediately. The other customers were dressed in designer clothes, their watches and jewelry catching the light as they moved. A couple near the center display case were speaking with British accents, the woman draped in what looked like a cashmere wrap that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Still, I reminded myself I had every right to be there. I had saved $8,000, and I was a potential customer like anyone else. I approached one of the display cases, admiring the watches inside. Each one sat on a small velvet cushion, price tags discreetly hidden. The craftsmanship was evident even to my untrained eye. Intricate dials, polished metals, leather straps that looked buttersoft. "May I help you?" The voice was cool and clipped. I looked up to see a tall man in his 40s wearing an impeccably tailored suit. His name tag read Richard Harrington, store manager. His expression was polite but distant, his eyes quickly taking in my appearance with barely concealed disdain. "Yes, please," I smiled warmly, trying to establish a friendly connection. "I'm looking for a vintage watch for my father's 65th birthday. Something classic, but not too flashy. He loves simplicity with quality craftsmanship." Richard's eyebrows lifted slightly. "I see," he said, in a tone that suggested he didn't really see at all. "And what price range were you considering?" "I can spend up to $8,000, I said confidently. If I expected him to look impressed, I was sorely disappointed. Instead, his lips twitched in what might have been an aborted smirk. $8,000, he repeated, as if testing how the words felt in his mouth. Well, our entry-level pieces begin around $15,000. The truly desirable vintage collections start at $30,000. My heart sank, but I kept my expression neutral. I see. Do you have anything at all in my budget? Even something pre-owned or from a less prestigious brand? Richard's face hardened almost imperceptibly. We don't typically deal in less prestigious brands, he said, making it sound like I'd suggested selling plastic toys. However, I suppose I could show you our clearance section. We occasionally have items there that might be more accessible. The way he said accessible made it sound like a disease. That would be great, I said, ignoring his tone. Richard snapped his fingers and a younger employee hurried over, a woman in her 20s with sleek blonde hair and a crisp white blouse. Olivia, please show this. He paused, searching for the right word, visitor to our clearance section. I need to attend to the Robertsons. He gestured toward the British couple I'd noticed earlier. Olivia gave me a quick, professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. This way, please. She led me to a small display case tucked in the far corner of the store, where the lighting was noticeably dimmer. Inside were watches that, while still beautiful to my untrained eye, apparently didn't meet the boutique standards for prime display. These are our discontinued models and trade-ins, Olivia explained, her tone suggesting she rarely had to show this case to customers. They start around $10,000, but there might be one or two below that. I peered into the case, and my eyes immediately caught on a vintage Omega with a simple round face and a worn brown leather strap. It had a certain understated elegance that reminded me of my dad. Could I see that one, please? I asked, pointing to it. Olivia hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if to check whether Richard was watching. Then, with visible reluctance, she unlocked the case and removed the watch. This is a 1960s Omega Seamaster, she said, placing it on a velvet pad. It's been restored, but it shows its age. The movement is original and recently serviced. It's priced at $7,500. I picked it up carefully, turning it over in my hands. It was perfect, classic, understated, with the kind of quiet dignity my dad embodied. And miraculously, it was within my budget. This is exactly what I'm looking for, I said, feeling a surge of excitement. It's perfect for my dad. Olivia looked surprised. You're sure? We don't offer returns on clearance items. I'm sure, I said firmly. My dad will love this. Just as I was about to ask about the purchase process, the boutique's atmosphere shifted. The door opened, and in walked a group of people who seemed to command attention without even trying. At the center was a tall, blonde woman with the kind of polished beauty that comes from expensive skincare routines and regular professional styling. She wore a cream-colored designer suit and diamonds that caught the light with every gesture. Next to her stood a slender brunette, who I immediately recognized as Victoria Bennett, a famous actress known for her roles in period dramas. Behind them trailed three other women, all immaculately dressed and groomed, all radiating the same aura of entitled wealth. The blonde woman, who I would later learn was Charlotte Winthrop, Boston's self-proclaimed style queen and social media influencer, paused and scanned the store like a queen surveying her domain. Her gaze landed on me, and her perfectly shaped eyebrows arched in surprise. Richard, who had been helping the British couple, practically teleported across the room to greet the newcomers. Miss Bennett, Mrs. Winthrop. What an honor to have you visit us today, he gushed, completely abandoning his previous customers. We just received a shipment of the new limited edition Patek Philippe collection. Only 20 pieces worldwide. I set one aside, hoping you might stop by. Charlotte gave him a practiced smile. How thoughtful, Richard. Victoria has been dying to see them, haven't you, darling? Victoria nodded, her eyes already scanning the main display cases. Richard snapped his fingers at another employee. James, champagne for our special guests. And bring out the Patek collection, the private viewing room, of course. As the staff scrambled to accommodate them, Charlotte's gaze drifted back to me. A small, Cold smile played on her lips. "Richard," she said, her voice carrying across the now hushed boutique, "I didn't realize Heritage had changed its clientele policy." She gave a dramatic head tilt in my direction. I felt my cheeks burn as every eye in the place turned to look at me. Richard's face flushed with embarrassment. "Oh, she's just looking at our clearance items," he said quickly, as if that explained everything. "Nothing to worry about, Mrs. Winthrop." Charlotte laughed, a tinkling sound devoid of any real humor. "Clearance at Heritage? That's like shopping for leftovers at a five-star restaurant." She turned to her friends. Maybe she wondered in thinking this was a department store sale. The women with her tittered appreciatively. Victoria, to her credit, didn't join in the mockery, though she did nothing to stop it either. She simply observed with cool detachment, occasionally checking her reflection in one of the mirrored display cases. I stood there, the omega still in my hand, feeling as if I'd shrunk to half my size. I wanted to say something to defend myself, but the words stuck in my throat. These weren't patients or colleagues I could reason with. These were people who lived in a completely different world from mine. Olivia, looking deeply uncomfortable, whispered, "Perhaps you'd like to think about it and come back another time?" It was a gentle suggestion to leave, to escape the humiliation. Part of me wanted to take it, to rush out the door and never look back. But a stronger part, the part that had worked double shifts and eaten ramen noodles for weeks to save up for Dad's gift, refused to be driven away. "No, thank you," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'd like to purchase this watch today. It's exactly what I'm looking for." Charlotte's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed. "Well, isn't that adorable?" she said. "Playing dress-up in the grown-up store." Richard, seemingly torn between his desire to please his elite customers and his duty to complete a sale, approached with a strained smile. "Perhaps we should wrap this up quickly," he suggested, taking the watch from my hands. "Olivia will process your payment at the register in the back." As Olivia led me toward the discreet register tucked away in a corner, I could hear Charlotte's voice behind me. "I hope they checked if her credit card is real. You never know these days." More laughter followed. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my wallet. I'd never been made to feel so small, so insignificant. But I kept thinking of my dad and how his face would light up when he opened the gift. That thought kept me standing tall as I handed over my debit card and watched nervously as Olivia processed the payment. $7,500. Nearly every penny I'd saved. But it would be worth it. "I'm sorry, but your card has been declined." The words hit me like a physical blow. Olivia looked at me with a mixture of pity and I knew it satisfaction. "That can't be right," I protested, feeling my cheeks flush hot with embarrassment. "I have the funds. Please try again." Olivia sighed but ran the card a second time. The terminal beeped in rejection once more. "Perhaps there's a daily limit on your card," she suggested, sounding not entirely unkind. From across the store, I could hear Charlotte's theatrical whisper, "Called it." I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. This wasn't just about the watch anymore, it was about dignity. I fumbled with my phone, opening my banking app with shaking fingers. The balance was there, $8,213.47. More than enough to cover the purchase. "I have the money," I insisted, turning my phone toward Olivia. "See? Maybe there's a problem with your machine." Olivia bit her lip, looking conflicted. "I'll try once more," but she was interrupted by Richard, who strode over with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Is there a problem?" he asked, though his tone made it clear he already knew the answer. "Her card was declined," Olivia explained quietly. Richard gave an exaggerated sigh. "As I suspected," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Look, miss, perhaps this isn't the right place for you. We cater to a certain clientele that can actually afford what we sell." The boutique had gone quiet. Everyone was watching now, the British couple, Charlotte, and her friends, even the other staff members. I felt like I was center stage in some humiliating play. I have the money, I repeated, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. There must be some mistake with the bank or the card reader. Richard's smile turned condescending. Of course. It's always the bank's fault, isn't it? Never that someone is trying to purchase beyond their means. He took the watch from the counter. I think we're done here. Perhaps try a department store? They have payment plans for people in your situation. Something broke inside me. All the exhaustion from my night shift, the emotional investment in finding the perfect gift for Dad, and now this public shaming, it was too much. My situation? I echoed, anger finally overtaking embarrassment. You mean being treated like dirt for not wearing designer clothes? For not having a famous name or a social media following? I'm a nurse who saves lives while you sell overpriced watches, and you think you can judge my worth by how I look. Richard's face hardened. Security, he called out, gesturing to a man in a dark suit standing near the entrance. Please escort this woman out. She's causing a disturbance. The security guard, a tall man with a buzz cut and an earpiece, started moving in my direction. This couldn't be happening. I was about to be thrown out of a store like some kind of criminal, all because I wanted to buy my dad a birthday present. But before the guard could reach me, a commanding voice cut through the tension. That won't be necessary. Everyone turned to see a distinguished-looking man in his 60s standing near the register. He wore a simple but clearly expensive navy suit, his silver hair neatly combed, his posture impeccable. There was an air of authority about him that made even Richard straighten up. Mr. Sullivan, Richard stammered, his demeanor completely transformed. I didn't realize you were in today. We're just handling a small situation with a difficult customer. Mr. Sullivan's eyes, sharp and assessing, flicked from Richard to me and back again. Is that so? He said mildly. Because what I observed was a paying customer being humiliated by my staff and other patrons. He turned to me. I'm Thomas Sullivan, Regional Director for Tempest Luxury Group. May I ask what happened here? The entire store seemed to hold its breath. Charlotte and her friends had gone very still, their expressions a mixture of surprise and unease. I was trying to buy a watch for my dad's birthday, I explained, my voice steadier now. I found one in my budget, but when I tried to pay, my card was declined. I have the funds, I can show you my account balance, but your manager suggested I was lying and called security. Mr. Sullivan's eyebrows rose. He turned to Richard. Is this how we treat customers now, Richard? Publicly humiliating them and questioning their integrity based on, what exactly? Their clothes? Their accent? Richard's face had gone from pale to red. Sir, I was simply trying to maintain the boutique standards. This woman clearly doesn't fit our target demographic, and when her card was declined, target demographic. Mr. Sullivan interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet. Would you care to elaborate on what exactly our target demographic is? Richard swallowed hard. Well, sir, obviously we cater to a more affluent clientele. People who appreciate fine horology and have the means to, so anyone who doesn't arrive in a chauffeur-driven car or wear this season's designer labels is automatically suspicious. Mr. Sullivan shook his head in disgust. That's not retail, Richard. That's prejudice. He turned to me again, his expression softening. I sincerely apologize for this treatment. Which watch were you interested in purchasing? I pointed to the Omega Seamaster, which Richard still held in his hand. Mr. Sullivan nodded approvingly. An excellent choice. Classic, reliable, with a distinguished history. Your father has good taste. He turned to Olivia. Please process the payment again, and if there's still an issue, we can explore other options. Perhaps the customer would like to wire the funds directly. Olivia nodded quickly and took my card again. This time, she used a different terminal, one from behind the counter. Meanwhile, Charlotte seemed to sense that the power dynamics had shifted. She sauntered over, her diamonds catching the light. Thomas, darling, she cooed, completely ignoring me now. Victoria and I were just admiring the new Patek collection. Will you be joining us for the charity gala next week? We're raising funds for underprivileged children." She said the last part with a quick, insincere glance in my direction. Mr. Sullivan gave her a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm afraid I'll have to check my calendar, Charlotte. At the moment, I'm focused on ensuring all our customers receive the exceptional service ChronoHeritage is known for." Charlotte's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered. Of course. Customer service is so important. Though I do think boutiques like yours need to maintain a certain ambience. Before Mr. Sullivan could respond, Olivia called out. The payment went through. She looked genuinely relieved. A weight lifted from my shoulders. The watch would be mine, or rather, my dad's. "Excellent," Mr. Sullivan said. "Please wrap it properly, our best presentation box." Richard, who had been standing by looking increasingly uncomfortable, cleared his throat. "Sir, the clearance items typically come with standard packaging, not our premium, the full ChronoHeritage experience." "Richard," Mr. Sullivan cut him off firmly. "This customer is paying good money for a fine timepiece. She deserves nothing less than what any other customer would receive." As Olivia busied herself with preparing the watch, Mr. Sullivan turned back to me. "What's your father's name, if you don't mind my asking?" "Robert," I replied. "Robert Miller. He raised me after my parents died, even though he was just my uncle and had never planned on having kids." Mr. Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. "A man of character, I'm sure. The Seamaster is a fitting choice. It's a watch that speaks to reliability and quiet strength." As we chatted, I noticed Charlotte and her entourage had moved to the private viewing room, though they kept casting glances our way. Richard hovered nearby, clearly unsure whether to attend to them or continue supervising my transaction. Olivia returned with an exquisite blue leather box, the ChronoHeritage logo embossed in silver on top. She opened it to reveal the Omega nestled on a bed of velvet, looking even more beautiful than before. "We've adjusted the strap to an average men's size, but your father can bring it in any time for a custom fitting at no charge," she explained, more warmly now. "It comes with a 2-year warranty and a certificate of authenticity." I stared at the watch, imagining the look on Dad's face when he opened it. Worth every penny, every moment of humiliation. "Thank you," I said sincerely, looking from Olivia to Mr. Sullivan. "This means a lot to me." Mr. Sullivan smiled, a genuine smile this time. "It's our pleasure. I hope your father enjoys his birthday and his new timepiece." As Olivia wrapped the box in elegant silver paper and placed it in a branded shopping bag, Charlotte emerged from the private viewing room, Victoria and their friends trailing behind her. "We'll take the rose gold Patek," she announced loudly. "And we're in a bit of a rush, so perhaps someone could assist us?" Richard practically sprinted across the boutique to serve them. "Of course, Mrs. Winthrop. I'll handle this personally." As I picked up my shopping bag and prepared to leave, Charlotte couldn't resist one final jab. "Oh, look at that. She actually managed to buy something from the clearance bin. How sweet." She turned to her friends. "It's like watching a child play dress up, isn't it?" I froze, my hand on the shopping bag. Mr. Sullivan's expression darkened, but before he could speak, the boutique's front door opened. And my entire world shifted. The man who walked in wasn't particularly tall, but he commanded attention immediately. He wore a simple charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my car, no tie, and a pair of round tortoiseshell glasses that gave him a scholarly air. His dark hair was lightly streaked with silver at the temples, and his face bore the weathered look of someone who worked hard, rather than someone who spent hours on beauty treatments. Behind him stood 2 men in discreet suits, clearly security, though they weren't obvious about it. A hush fell over the boutique. Even Charlotte stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening slightly. I, however, felt my face break into a genuine smile for the first time since I'd entered the store. "Michael," I said, my voice warm with affection. "What are you doing here?" "I thought you were in Stockholm until Thursday." My husband, because that's who he was, crossed the room to my side, dropping a light kiss on my cheek. Wrapped up early and caught the first flight back, he replied, his Boston accent more pronounced than usual, something that happened when he was tired. Texted you but didn't hear back, so I tracked your phone. Hope you don't mind the surprise. He glanced around, taking in the scene. Everything okay here? Before I could answer, Richard appeared as if from thin air, his entire demeanor transformed. Mr. Reynolds, he exclaimed, using the deferential tone I'd heard him use with Charlotte earlier. What an unexpected pleasure, sir. We weren't expecting you today. Michael regarded him coolly. Evidently not. Richard's smile faltered slightly. Is there something specific you're looking for today, sir? Perhaps something from our new collection. Michael ignored him, focusing instead on me. Did you find something for your dad? He asked softly. I nodded, holding up the shopping bag. An Omega Seamaster from the 60s. It's perfect, classic, but not flashy, just like Dad. Michael smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling in the way I loved. He'll be thrilled. Worth the splurge. Definitely, I confirmed. Though there were a few complications with the purchase. Michael's eyebrows rose. He looked at Mr. Sullivan, who had been watching our exchange with growing interest. Thomas, Michael greeted him with a nod. Wasn't expecting to see you in Boston. Michael, Mr. Sullivan returned the greeting with equal familiarity. Just doing some routine quality checks across the regional boutiques. He paused. I wasn't aware that you and... He looked at me questioningly. Emma, I supplied. Emma Miller Reynolds. I wasn't aware that you and Emma were acquainted, Mr. Sullivan finished, a new note of respect in his voice when he addressed me. Michael slipped an arm around my waist. Emma's my wife. Going on 3 years now. The effect of those simple words was immediate and dramatic. Richard's face drained of color. Olivia's jaw actually dropped. Charlotte and her friends, who had been hovering nearby pretending not to eavesdrop, froze in a tableau of shock. Because everyone in the luxury retail world knew who Michael Reynolds was, founder and CEO of Tempest Luxury Group, the parent company that owned Chrono Heritage and dozen other high-end boutiques across the globe. He was a self-made billionaire who had built his empire from a single watch repair shop he'd opened in South Boston 20 years ago. And he was my husband. Not that you'd know it from looking at me. I still worked as a nurse, drove my old Honda, and lived modestly. It was a choice we'd made together when we married. I didn't want to give up my career or my identity, and Michael respected that. Most of his employees had no idea he was even married, let alone to someone like me. Your wife, Richard repeated, his voice faint. For 3 wonderful years, Michael confirmed, giving me a squeeze. Then his expression hardened as he looked at Richard. Now, would someone like to explain why my wife seems to have had complications while shopping in one of my stores? The silence that followed was deafening. Richard looked like he might actually faint. It was Mr. Sullivan who finally spoke. I believe there was a misunderstanding regarding Emma's eligibility as a customer, he said diplomatically. Based largely on appearance rather than reality. Michael's eyes narrowed dangerously. Elaborate. Mr. Sullivan glanced at Richard, clearly giving him the opportunity to explain himself. Richard's Adam's apple bobbed nervously. It was a simple misunderstanding, sir, he began, his voice unnaturally high. The customer, I mean Mrs. Reynolds, was dressed. That is to say, she didn't appear to be. We have certain standards for our clientele and standards. Michael interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet. What standards exactly, Richard? Financial? Social? Or just whether someone is wearing the right clothes? Richard stammered incoherently. Michael turned to me. What happened, Emma? The whole story. I hesitated, looking around at the now captive audience. This wasn't just about me anymore. It could affect people's jobs, Richard's career. It's not important now, I said softly. I got Dad's watch, and Mr. Sullivan was very helpful. But Michael knew me too well. Emma, he said gently, what happened? So I told him everything from the initial cold reception to the clearance section treatment, Charlotte's mockery, the payment issues, and finally being threatened with security. I didn't embellish or exaggerate. I just stated the facts as they had occurred. With each word, Michael's expression grew darker. By the time I finished, the boutique was so quiet you could hear the ticking of the display watches. "Let me get this straight," Michael said, his voice controlled but vibrating with anger. My wife was humiliated, mocked, accused of fraud, and nearly thrown out of my own store because she wasn't wearing designer labels or flashing a platinum card. No one answered. No one dared. Michael turned to Charlotte, who had been trying to inch toward the exit. "Mrs. Winthrop, I believe?" Charlotte froze, then turned with a practiced smile. "Mr. Reynolds, such a pleasure to finally meet you. I'm a great admirer of your business acumen." "Is that so?" Michael replied coldly. "Strange, then, that you'd feel entitled to mock a paying customer in one of my establishments." Charlotte's smile faltered. "There seems to be a misunderstanding. I was merely joking around. If I'd known she was your wife, that's exactly the problem." Michael cut her off. "You shouldn't treat anyone that way, regardless of who they're married to. My wife doesn't use my name or position when she shops because she believes everyone deserves equal treatment regardless of their connections or bank balance. A principle that is apparently not shared by those working in or frequenting this boutique." He turned to Richard. "As for you," Richard flinched visibly. "I expect my staff to treat every customer with respect and dignity, regardless of how they're dressed or what their perceived social status might be. The woman in sweatpants might be a tech billionaire. The man in worn jeans might own half the real estate in the city. Or they might be ordinary people who saved for years to buy something special." Michael's voice hardened. "But even if they aren't rich or connected, even if they're spending their last dollar in your store, they deserve to be treated with basic human decency." Richard nodded frantically. "Of course, sir. Absolutely, sir. It won't happen again." "You're right about that," Michael agreed. "Because effective immediately, you're relieved of your position as manager of this boutique." A collective gasp echoed through the store. Richard went pale. "But sir," he protested weakly, "I've been with the company for 7 years. "Then you should have known better," Michael replied implacably. "Thomas will handle the transition. You'll receive 2 months severance pay, more generosity than you showed my wife." Richard looked shell-shocked. Charlotte and her friends were edging toward the door, clearly hoping to escape before Michael's wrath turned their way again. "As for you, Mrs. Winthrop," Michael called out, stopping Charlotte in her tracks. "While I can't prevent you from shopping in my stores, I can ensure that your preferred status and automatic discounts are revoked. Perhaps paying full price like everyone else will give you a new perspective on the value of humility." Charlotte's face flushed an unflattering shade of red. Without another word, she and her entourage fled the boutique, the Patek Philippe forgotten on the counter. In the silence that followed, Michael turned to Mr. Sullivan. "Thomas, I'd like you to personally oversee this location for the next few weeks. Find a new manager who understands that luxury isn't about exclusion. It's about making everyone feel valued, regardless of their appearance or background." Of course, Mr. Sullivan agreed. "I already have a few candidates in mind." He glanced meaningfully at Olivia, who had been the only staff member to show me any real kindness. Michael nodded, then turned to me with a softer expression. "Ready to go, Em? We've got dinner with your dad tonight, remember?" I nodded, still processing everything that had happened. As Michael guided me toward the door, I caught sight of my reflection in one of the boutique's mirrors. I still looked exactly the same, messy ponytail, faded clothes, worn shoes. But the way people were looking at me now was completely different. And I hated it. Outside on the sidewalk, I stopped and turned to Michael. "You know this isn't what I wanted," I said quietly. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know. You hate using my position or name for any advantage. But Emma, what happened in there wasn't right. It wasn't about getting special treatment. It was about being treated like a human being. I know, I acknowledged. And I appreciate you standing up for me, for everyone who gets judged based on appearances. I trailed off, not sure how to express the complicated emotions I was feeling. Michael smiled gently. You just wish people could see past the surface in both directions. Whether you're dressed like a nurse after a long shift or like the wife of a CEO at a charity gala. Exactly, I said, relieved that he understood. We started walking again, his hand warm in mine. By the way, Michael said after a moment, I think that Omega is perfect for your dad. He's going to love it. I smiled, thinking of the watch nestled in its blue leather box. He taught me that the value of things isn't in their price tag, but in the meaning behind them. Smart man, Michael replied. I knew there was a reason I liked him from the start. As we turned the corner, leaving Chrono Heritage behind, I thought about the extraordinary series of events that had unfolded that day. I hadn't gone in expecting special treatment, and I certainly hadn't planned for Michael to show up and turn everything upside down. But maybe some good would come of it. Maybe someone else in worn jeans and scuffed shoes would get treated with dignity the next time they walked into a luxury store. And that more than any watch or status symbol was worth its weight in gold. And that's how a simple shopping trip turned into both a humiliating and ultimately triumphant experience for Emma. What started as a heartfelt quest to find the perfect birthday gift for her adoptive father became a powerful lesson about judgment, appearances, and the dangerous assumptions we make about others based on how they look. Emma didn't walk into that boutique expecting special treatment. Despite being married to a billionaire, she chose to live modestly, work as a nurse, and make her own way in the world. She saved her own money for that watch because the gift's meaning came from her personal sacrifice, not her husband's wealth. The store manager, Richard, made a critical error that many of us are guilty of, judging someone's worth by their outward appearance. Charlotte and her socialite friends reinforced this toxic behavior, creating an environment where someone could be mocked and humiliated simply for not fitting a certain image of wealth and status. But this story reminds us that true character isn't found in designer clothes or expensive jewelry. It's found in people like Emma's father, who sacrificed his own comforts to raise his orphan niece, and in Emma herself, who maintained her dignity despite cruel treatment. When Michael Reynolds finally appeared, it wasn't just about satisfying revenge. It was about correcting an injustice that happens every day to people who don't have powerful spouses to defend them. His anger wasn't about someone disrespecting his wife. It was about his employees disrespecting a human being. What would you have done in Emma's situation? Would you have revealed your connection to power earlier, or would you have stood your ground as she did? And if you were Michael, how would you have handled those who mistreated your spouse? Remember, the next person you interact with, regardless of how they're dressed or what they look like, deserves to be treated with basic human dignity. You never know their story, their struggles, or who they might be connected to. If you enjoyed this tale of sweet justice, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this important message. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss our next compelling story.